the first radical expression, 2 times the square root of 2 plus 6 times the square root of 2, we notice that the insides of the radicals are the same, as in both of them are the square root of 2. So since both radicals match, we can just add the outsides, and it becomes 8 times the square root of 2. Let's look at our next example. 4 times the square root of 10 plus the square root of 13 plus 9 times the square root of 10. We can only add things that look the same. So in this case, we can only add the 4 times the square root of 10 to the 9 times the square root of 10. 4 plus 9 is 13, so our answer here is 13 times the square root of 10 plus the square root of 13. The square root of 13 doesn't match the others, so we can't add it to anything else. Our final answer is 13 times the square root of 10 plus the square root of 13. Let's look at our third example. We have 5 times the square root of 5 minus 6 times the square root of 5. Subtracting is the same as adding. We only subtract things that look alike. Therefore, we take 5 minus 6, which is negative 1, and we just add the radical to the end. So our final answer is negative 1 times the square root of 5. We don't have to write the 1, so we really can just write negative square root of 5. In our next example, we have 2 times the square root of 6 minus 5 times the square root of 54. The first thing we need to do is to simplify any radical that we see. 2 times the square root of 6 doesn't simplify, but 5 times the square root of 54 breaks down to 5 times the square root of 2 times 3 times 3 times 3. So we're going to find our pair of 3's, and we're going to bring that outside the radical and multiply it by what's already there. We have 2 times the square root of 6 minus 15 times the square root of 6. Now, we simply subtract the outsides. 2 minus 15 is negative 13 times the square root of 6. In our next example, we have 5 times the square root of 3 plus the square root of 48. Just like before, we simplify all the radicals first. We have 5 times the square root of 3 plus the square root of 4 times 3. We bring out the pair, and we have 5 times the square root of 3 plus 4 times the square root of 3. Next, we add the outsides together and get 9 times the square root of 3. In our next example, we have the square root of 5 times 4 minus the square root of 20. First, we need to distribute the radical to everything in the parentheses. So we get the square root of 5 times 4 minus the square root of 5 times the square root of 20. The next thing we do is we simplify. So we get 4 times the square root of 5 minus the square root of 100. Next, we simplify the radicals. 4 times the square root of 5 doesn't simplify any further, but then the square root of 100 is 10. So our final answer is 4 times the square root of 5 minus 10. In our next problem, we have the square root of 7 plus the square root of 2 times the square root of 7 minus 3 times the square root of 2. This problem seems really overwhelming at first, but we just use the same process. We distribute everything in the first set of parentheses to everything in the second set of parentheses. You referred to this as FOIL in other lessons. The square root of 7 times the square root of 7 is the square root of 49. The square root of 2 times the square root of 7 is the square root of 14. And then 3 times the square root of 2 times the square root of 7 is 3 times the square root of 14. And finally, 3 times the square root of 2 times the square root of 2 is 3 times the square root of 4. That's a lot going on. Next, we need to combine like terms and simplify radicals. The square root of 49 is 7. The square root of 14 minus 3 square roots of 14 make 2 times the square root of 14. And then the square root of 4 is 2. So we say 3 times 2. Our next step is to simplify even further. It becomes 7 plus 6 because 3 times 2 is 6, and then minus 2 times the square root of 14. We leave that 2 times the square root of 14 all on its own. 7 plus 6 is 13, and so our final answer is 13 minus 2 times the square root of 14. You try this next one on your own. 4 minus the square root of 5 times 1 minus the square root of 5. Pause the video and take a minute and try it. First, FOIL the things together. So you get 4 times 1, which is 4. Negative square root of 5 times 1 is negative square root of 5. 4 times the negative square root of 5 is negative 4 times the square root of 5. And the square root of 5 times the square root of 5 is the square root of 25. The next thing we need to do is to simplify. So we have 4 minus 3 times the square root of 5 plus 5. Well, 4 plus 5 is 9, and so we're left with 9 minus 3 times the square root of 5. Now for our very last problem. We have 2 times the square root of 5 plus 7 squared. This really is just the same thing as we did before. First, we write the binomial twice. 2 times the square root of 5 plus 7 times 2 times the square root of 5 plus 7. Next, we FOIL them together. So we get 4 times the square root of 25 plus 14 times the square root of 5 plus 14 times the square root of 5 plus 49. That's a lot going on. The next thing that we need to do is we need to simplify. The square root of 25 is 5, so we multiply 4 times 5. We combine the two square roots of 5, so we get 14 plus the square root of 5 and 14 plus the square root of 5, and that becomes 28 times the square root of 5 plus 49. Next, we continue to simplify, and we get 20 plus 28 times the square root of 5 plus 49. Finally, we combine like terms, and we get 69 plus 28 times the square root of 5.